So for this demo, let's show you some of the basic principles of adding squash and stretch to your animation. You can see in our timeline that we've got two different objects. We've got our ball and a wall. And all I'm going to do is show the ball stretching out as it approaches the wall at a very high speed, squashing when it hits it, and then bouncing back. Now, the other thing about this is that it's more than just an animation technique, it's also an acting technique. So a lot of this has to do with timing and how many frames you want to allocate for each different action. But we're going to keep it relatively simple for now. Right now I've got it set up for 1 second. So let's say in half a second it takes it to reach the wall. So going up to my timeline, I'll select my 12th frame, we'll insert a keyframe, and by frame number 12, it should be reaching this particular point. Now, as it moves from the left to the right, it needs to be stretching outward in the direction that it moves. So to do this, we're going to grab our free transform tool, and there's two different ways you can transform something. With that selected, you can open up your transform panel and dial in exactly the amount of stretch and squash that you want to have. This is a really good method because you can control the preciseness of its squash and stretch. Or if you wanted to eyeball it, you can just use your free transform tool, as I'm about to do here. The thing to remember is when you click and drag, if you just click on it, you'll notice that it clicks and drags from both particular sides. If you only want to affect one side, hold down the Option key as you click and drag, and that will get the entire thing stretched out just on this side. The other thing to remember is, as much as you stretch one direction, you also need to squash it in the other direction. So in this case, I'm going to let go of my Option key and let it squash out to right about there. So now backing back out, we'll return to our time frame. Keyframe 1, we'll put it on this side. So let's insert a classic tween and we'll let it stretch out just as it hits from there. So very quickly, boom, it'll hit that particular side. The next thing we want it to do is to squash on the next keyframe. So by the time it hits it at this point, we'll insert another keyframe. And instead of having it stretch out, we'll hold down Option, pull it back in a little bit more, and we'll have it stretch out as it hits this frame. Now in this case, I'm only giving it one frame of squash, and then before it returns back and hits the next frame as well. So now let's animate our returning motion. If this is the frame before it hits, then after it hits, we want the next frame to be squashing back out and launching off. So let's insert one more keyframe after our squash. Again, select our ball. I'm going to hold down Option and stretch it out, and even squash it back in, and then have it return to the normal ball state here at the very end. The thing about this state is I want it to look exactly the same as the first frame that we have. So I'm going to do a trick. With my first frame selected, I'm going to go up to Edit, down to my timeline, and we're going to, copy these frames. There it is, copy frames. Notice that it's Option Command C for our keyboard shortcut. When I've copied frame 1, I can go over to frame number 30, and we can go to Edit, Timeline, and paste the frames. And that'll put the exact same frame right there. Now all we need to do is add our motion tween. So selecting that stretched out here, we'll insert or create a classic tween to this. Now let's test our animation. Command and return. And you can see now how it's stretching out and bouncing back and forth as it moves. Again, this is also an acting technique, so this is the kind of thing where you would want to play around with the amount of time and the amount of number of frames that it's needed to perform your action. Maybe you think that it needs a little bit more time for the squashing effect, so I can go into this frame where it's squashed, hit F5, and I can insert another keyframe to let it hold on that squashed effect. Let's see what happens now. We'll also add some frames to our background. Adding one extra frame, in my opinion, makes it seem like it's bouncing a little bit better for here, because I can notice it and I can see exactly how it bounces with this. Keep in mind for this demo, it's also working at 30 frames per second instead of 24, so things do tend to go a little bit faster per frame than we're usually used to. All right, so that's it for squash and stretch. The main thing to remember is as it's moving fast and picking up speed, it stretches out. But as soon as it makes an abrupt change, it will squash in, and you want to make sure it keeps roughly the same volume as it's moving across and then back to normal from there.